giving children a voice in their own education. An issue which is still so controversial, so revolutionary for the United Nations that people can't even begin to speak about it. When the Convention on the Rights of the Child was drafted, it was one of the big successes of the United Nations. True, it took 20 years to draft it. Diplomatic life is very slow. Meetings are very tedious. But after 20 years, in 1989, there was a Convention on the Rights of the Child. Again, it says all sorts of pretty things. It's beautiful. It enumerates what rights every child should have, including a child with disability, including a refugee child, asylum-seeking child, a child soldier. It's all there. To make it happen, one would have to convert our mentalities. It's not the United Nations, it's us adults as well, to start accepting children as bearers of rights. And it doesn't go easy, I can tell you from my own experience. What United Nations Special Rapporteurs do is lots of useless and boring things. Attending meetings, presenting reports, corresponding with governments, which is always a price to be able to pay, to be able to do interesting things. Two interesting things which I'm able to do and which I do with a great deal of joy, even if it's often depressive, is to go around the world to look what happens in prisons, what happens in schools, what happens in orphanages, and what needs to be done. This fact-finding is, all our mandates are global, it's immense, so it takes a great deal of traveling, a great deal of looking around. The other part is immensely interesting because we are allowed to respond to individual complaints of human rights violations. It is not a legal procedure, so we don't look into whether an individual or organization has recognized standing. We can undertake action, contact the government accused of violation immediately, having received a credible complaint, which we have to check for the facts for the originator ourselves. One of the cases which has come thus to my attention was a case initiated by a group of English children, 10 to 14-year-olds, who have somehow, they would never quite explain to me how, they have gotten attracted to this right to education, not from the side of formal access to school. All of them happens to be children of families who would have forced to school them well. But what they wanted was to have their rights as children recognized in school. They are attending an experimental school which gives children lots of democratic participation, lots of say in their own curriculum program, and which the government of the United Kingdom is now threatening to close down. The school doesn't fit into the existing model. The school is revolutionary because children have an assembly where teachers, including head teacher, participate. All major decisions are reached democratically. Everybody has one vote, the headmistress and the youngest child. They want it kept that way. They like it. So I had a debate with 4 representatives who they sent to talk to me to try to persuade me to take their case. I can tell you immediately I've taken their case. But then I wanted to hear what children see as human rights issues in their education. How would they design education for themselves? To basically get it from the horse's mouth. What are we doing or not doing if we see our educational systems and laws, even human rights in education, through our eyes rather than through children's eyes? And one of them, a very militant child rights activist who had lots of criticism to the United Nations in general, me in particular, was trying to argue the point that denying children their rights is an ideal way of producing out of them child soldiers, dictators, a very nasty layer of humanity. How? And the boy has worked it out perfectly. He said, look, there is nothing which is worse for me or anybody else than being crowded into classroom, forced to listen and repeat senseless nonsense. This is exact quote, that's how he put it, and being beaten up. If you challenge any of this senseless nonsense, if you try to say something, if you do the wrong thing, if you think the wrong thing, you will be physically beaten into submission. What better way of creating soldiers, dictators, whatever we might be unwilling of creating? But then he had ideas about his own and other people's education, this privileged group of children who will not end up in prisons, in armies. And I tried to argue it with him to see whether a 46-year-old university professor can have a substantive debate with a 12-year-old on human rights issues in education and how that will end up. I try to tell him that we do not allow children to decide upon their own education for their own good, that we force children to go through all compulsory school curriculum to obtain basic knowledge and skills as broadly as possible so that whatever they decide after they become adults, they have background from which they can develop their whatever professional, academic, or sports career. He thought that this type of argument was fairly reasonable, but not good enough. And when I tried to challenge him to say, okay, what would you do instead? He said, I would give children option. If they want to devote all their education to music or sports, subsequently, if they change their mind and decide they wanted to do electrical engineering or computer science, they will be lacking the background. But once given a choice, they have to be told that they will bear the responsibility for it. So they will have to catch up in studying whatever it is that they missed in their basic education in their own time at their own expense. However, they will do their education with a great deal of enthusiasm because they chose it themselves. That they can feel that by having obtained the right, having exercised their freedom of choice, they really are in charge of their own destiny, which we do not allow to children, not only if they are 10 or 12, but in some African countries, such as Swaziland, a little speck of land in the middle of South Africa, although 60% of the population are children, they are between 0 and 18 years old, so children in terms of international human rights law. They only obtain a say in their education, in their medical treatment relating to their own marriages or family relations when they become 21. Which means if you look how we have structured laws relating to children, then you will see that we as adults give ourselves a right to treat them as objects all the way up to the age of 21. If one looks now into our educational systems, into our educational practices, from the viewpoint of how far or how close they are to the ideas about the rights of the child, then one can see indeed that we have a long way to go. I shall finish my introductory monologue at this point and invite immediately questions, comments, suggestions, agreements, disagreements from all of you, so that we would now convert from monologue to dialogue and have, I hope, some lively discussion. Thank you.